What if Clint Eastwood wasn't just playing a spy, but actually was one? Sounds crazy, right? But the truth is darker than Hollywood ever revealed. His secret life was never meant to be exposed. Until now. Stay with me. You won't believe what comes next. Dear listeners, before we move forward, please subscribe my channel to hit 1,000 figure. Clint Eastwood's eyes always held a story, one deeper than Hollywood ever knew. The world saw him as a legend, but few understood that behind the camera, he played a far more dangerous role. It was a cold night in 1971. In a dimly lit bar in San Francisco, Clint sat across from a man known only as Mr. White. No small talk, no pleasantries, just a single photograph placed on the table. This man cannot be allowed to live. Clint stared at the image. His face hardened for just a moment. This wasn't a world of bright lights and rolling cameras. This was a world of shadows, deception, and silent strikes. The audience knew him as an actor, but in reality, he was something else entirely, a shadow agent. Clint picked up the photograph and studied it. The man in the image looked ordinary, mid-40s, slightly receding hairline, sharp eyes that hinted at a life lived in secrecy. But Clint knew better. There was no such thing as an ordinary target in this line of work. Who is he? Clint's voice was calm, almost indifferent. Mr. White leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. A Soviet handler, real name unknown. Operates under the alias Viktor Reznikov. He's been coordinating spies across the West Coast, and we believe he's planning something big, something that could change the balance of power. You take him out, and we cut the head off the snake. Clint exhaled slowly, setting the photograph back down. Hollywood had given him the perfect cover. Who would ever suspect that one of the most famous men in America was also working in the shadows? It was the ideal deception. When he traveled, people assumed it was for film shoots. When he disappeared for weeks at a time, the excuse was always preparing for a role. But this wasn't an act. He had been pulled into this world years ago, during his time in the military. Stationed at Fort Ord, he had shown a talent for survival, strategy, and reading people. Someone took notice. Someone high up. And by the time he had his first major film role, he was already involved in something far more dangerous than Hollywood shootouts. Now, decades later, he was being asked to pull the trigger for real. Clint's fingers drummed lightly against the table. Where is he now? Los Angeles. He moves often, but we have a lead. A club called the Red Lantern. He's expected there in 3 nights. Clint nodded, pushing the photo back toward Mr. White. There was no need for more words. He stood, adjusted his coat, and walked out of the bar into the cold night. As he disappeared into the fog, he wasn't Clint Eastwood, the actor. He was the shadow agent. Los Angeles shimmered under the neon glow of the city's restless nightlife. Clint blended into the crowd, his every step calculated, his eyes scanning for threats. The Red Lantern was the kind of place where deals were made in whispers, and enemies vanished without a trace. Clint entered through the side door, his presence unnoticed. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, the scent of expensive liquor hanging heavy. A jazz band played lazily in the background, but Clint wasn't here for the music. He spotted his mark, Viktor Reznikov, sitting in a corner booth, speaking in hushed tones with another man. Clint didn't move in immediately. Patience was everything. He leaned against the bar, ordering a drink he wouldn't touch. He watched. He listened. Reznikov was careful. He never turned his back to the room, never let his guard down. The man across from him slid a folder across the table. Clint caught a glimpse of its contents. Blueprints, technical schematics, something important. Too important. This wasn't just a routine operation. Reznikov was planning something big. Clint's mind worked fast. He couldn't take the shot here, not in a public place crawling with eyes and ears. He needed Reznikov alone, vulnerable. Then opportunity struck. Reznikov stood, adjusting his coat. His associate handed him a small briefcase before slipping out the back entrance. Clint watched as Reznikov made his way toward the exit. This was it. Clint took a slow breath, casually moving through the room. His heart didn't race. His hands were steady. He had done this before. He would do it again. As Reznikov stepped outside, Clint followed, disappearing into the darkness. The hunt had begun. The alley behind the Red Lantern was quiet except for the distant hum of the city. A single street lamp flickered, casting long shadows against the brick walls. Reznikov walked briskly, briefcase in hand, his posture tense. He knew someone was watching. He just didn't know who. Clint followed at a measured pace, his footsteps silent. He had done this before. He had eliminated threats that most Americans never even knew existed. But this was different. Reznikov wasn't just another target. He was a man who held secrets that could change the course of history. Reznikov paused near a parked car, reaching into his coat. Clint knew what was coming. A gun. Before Reznikov could react, Clint closed the distance. A swift movement, one precise strike to the throat, cut off the Russian's breath before he could scream. The gun clattered to the pavement. Reznikov stumbled, gasping, his eyes wide with panic. Clint grabbed him by the collar, forcing him against the car. "What's in the case?" His voice was low, controlled. Reznikov coughed, struggling to breathe. No answers. Clint had no time for negotiations. A car turned the corner, its headlights sweeping across the alley. Clint acted fast, twisting Reznikov's arm behind his back and driving him to the ground. A sharp crack, bone snapping. The Russian let out a muffled groan, his strength fading. Clint reached down, snatching the briefcase. He flipped it open. Inside, documents, coded transmissions, and something far more dangerous. Blueprints for a missile guidance system. This wasn't just about one man. It was bigger. Clint stood looking down at the lifeless body at his feet. Another ghost in the shadows, another mission completed. As he walked away, disappearing into the night, he knew the world would never know what had just happened. The headlines would talk about his next film, his next role. But the real story would remain in the dark, because that was the way of the shadow agent.